in, but we're going to recap a little bit. Also, if we go ahead and start, that means Tommy can sit down. He may not look out for himself. I'll look out for him. All right, we are wrapping up the book of Exodus. We'll wrap it up today and get started with Leviticus next time. And it's taken me a little while to get everything pieced together. We're going back through and we're re-looking through things. And last time we talked about the making of the ark, making the table. And I don't know about you, but I am a visual person. I like things to be visual. So I went through and combed some resources to see if maybe I can find some good visualizations for what we're talking about. I found some, and I wanted to kind of show them to you so that we have them, maybe get an idea. So as we're talking about the tabernacle, we've got things that we have talked about. So you have this outer courtyard that is made up of curtains with uprights and stanchions that go all the way around. And at the front, which is the little purple on the screen there at the front, that is where they would go into the tabernacle court. And it was there that the altar was, the basin, and then it's shown there on a cutaway in the far back. You've got what is the tabernacle. Now, we've talked about a lot of this already, but we'll go back through it just so you get a visual. The first thing that you'll note there is what is the altar, where they would offer the sacrifice. I'm sure everybody sees that really well. I can't, so I'm going to zoom in. And so what we have is a box that is overlaid in bronze. And then you have this grating around it. And you stop and think about the functionality of this. There's going to be a fire in there in order to make the offerings. And the three things you need for a fire is fuel, oxygen, and combustion. And so if that was a closed bottom there, you wouldn't get much oxygen. So that is a rough approximation. And then you have the little horns on the corner of the altar. And then you have the little ringlets there on the edges, which they would stick poles through and carry it from point A to point B. Now, the next thing is the basin. And at the basin was where the priest would wash and cleanse themselves. And this is where things take a turn, okay? Because, let me zoom in. That's as good as it gets. Unlike with the altar, there seems to be some subjectivity when it comes to the basin. Because when you go back and you read about the making of the basin, we get in chapter 38, verse 8, he made the basin of bronze, its stand of bronze, from the mirrors of the ministering women who ministered at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And even if you go back a couple of chapters and read about, it's chapter 30, about the bronze basin, chapter 30, verse 17, it says, "You shall also make a basin of bronze with its stand of bronze for washing. You shall put it between the tent of meeting and the altar. You shall put water in it, which Aaron and his sons shall wash with water, so that they wash their hands and feet when they go into the tent of meeting." And that's about it. So unlike the ark that says it's got to be this big by this big by this big, and unlike the altar that's got to be this, it says just make a bronze basin. And we assume through the Holy Spirit they knew what to make. And so the one artist depicts it like this. Well, several other artists have other interpretations of what it looked like. I'm particularly fond of the one in the top middle of the basin on wheels. The one on the top right has little spigots that they could fill up a jug with. The one on the top left is very similar. The problem with several of these, like the ones on the far right, how are you going to carry that, right? It's got to be portable. And so there's a certain level of subjectivity in the interpretation of what the basin looked like. And the truth is we don't know. The truth is we're speculating a lot, but this one particular piece of the tabernacle equipment, we just have really no earthly idea what it looked like. So dealer's choice what it was. So then back into the tabernacle complex. Once you went from the altar to the basin, then you get to the tabernacle proper, or the tent of meeting. And we've talked about before how it had a framework of wood, and then it had inner curtains and outer curtains. You see there at the very front of the tent of meeting, which is on the far right of the screen, a little fella down here, that is the high priest. The high priest had his garments. The garments had the ephod, and it had the different stones that were worked into it. He had the turban that he wore on his head. You keep looking, then you have what is the table of the bread of presence. And again, you know, it's got the rings in it so that they can carry it from point A to point B. All of these things are overlaid in gold, and we talked about that because it is precious, and because it is meant to be the purest, the best, the most valuable. The next thing that we see is what we talked about last week, which is the lampstand, right? And so the lampstand is made of 75 pounds of pure gold. And Belafont and I got talking about it later after we had talked about it, and the value of that lampstand, if it were to be built today, would be over $2 million. You just think about that, over $2 million for the lights. That's a nice light. But you see, you've got the stem coming up from the lampstand, and you've got the flowers. And we again talked about how it was meant to be decorative as well as functional. Then you have the altar of incense, where they would offer incense to God. And it is very similar in design in a lot of ways to the actual altar for burnt offerings. Again, you notice rings, poles to be carried. Then you have the curtain, which separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies. And at the very back, you have the ark. And you see there the ark with the cherubim facing in with their wings extended to make the mercy seat. Again, some artistic interpretation. The cherubim, like we said, are much more like Lamassu from the ancient Near East. They're beings with animal bodies, human faces, kind of like a sphinx. Then we just go back out to look at the totality of this and think about every time they had to move, they have to tear it all down, pack it all up, and move it from point A to point B. You know, I like to go camping, but I couldn't do this. You know, it's not my cup of tea. So, any questions? I don't know if visualization helps for you to kind of picture it in your mind, but these things are not small. They're big, but this was what God instructed them to build. So, any questions or comments? When I get to heaven, I won't care what the basin is, but I do kind of want to know. What did it actually look like? All right. Well, let's get into the text. We'll read through. We're in chapter 38, and we will wrap up 38, 39, and 40. I'm just going to leave that up there so that we can continue talking. Good morning.
Good morning. Start with
We are in Exodus chapter 38 this morning.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so Exodus 38, we're going to begin in verse 1. It says, He made the altar a burnt offering of acacia wood. 5 cubits was its length, 5 cubits its breadth. It was square, 3 cubits was its height. He made horns on the 4 corners. Because I can. There we go. Wait. Yeah, altar burnt offering. 3 cubits was its height. He made the horns on its 4 corners. Its horns were of one piece with it. He overlaid it with bronze. He made all the utensils of the altar, the pots, the shovels, the basins, the forks, the fire pans. He made all of its utensils of bronze. He made the altar a grating, a network of bronze under its ledge extending halfway down. He cast 4 rings on the 4 corners, bronze grating, its holders for the poles. Made the poles of acacia wood, and he put the poles through the rings on the side of the altar. He made it hollow with boards. All right. So, again, this altar that we're talking about is 5 cubits square. So we're talking 7.5 feet. Okay? So it's 7.5 by 7.5. And then it's 3 cubits tall. So that's 4.5 feet tall. All right? So it's coming up to about here, right? And these pews are about 10-ish feet. So we're talking about here to here, and then here to there. Like, you got to think, it's got to be big enough to put an ox on, right? It's got to be a big thing. And again, another functionality of making it wood overlaid with metal is it's lighter, right? If it was just solid metal, it would not be as light. So that is the altar, and again, this is where it gets interesting into interpretation, because as you read it there in verse 4, it says, He made the altar a grating, a network of bronze under its ledge extending halfway down. Well, that's certainly an interpretation of that, right? But in my mind, it may be that the grating was all the way down to the bottom. Halfway is how I think of it. But we don't know. So this is just an artistic rendering going into the bronze basin that we talked about. He made the bronze basin and its stand of bronze from the mirrors of the ministering women who ministered in the entrance of the tent of meeting. And that's just a fun notation there. One, it's made of bronze from mirrors. Now, back then, the way that you made a mirror was that you took a piece of metal, you polished it to a shine, and then you looked on it. If you ever, if you have like silver, or you remember maybe a parent or grandparent that had silver where you actually had to polish the silver, and then you just kind of can look at it and see your face in it. It's not a good representation, but it's a representation. It gives you a hint of it. But odds are good that that's the kind of mirrors we're talking here. Later, things like mercury and things like that were added into mirrors like we think of, and now they're basically like a film. But we also get the introduction of ministering women, that there is this group of women who served a role in taking care of needs at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And we go on and we'll talk more about that later. Any questions on the altar or the bronze basin? Again, this is just a hand washing station. That's all it is. So I think if Matt had to make a choice, Matt is going to lean towards the ones on the left-hand side. A little more plain, a little more simple, which is befitting the things we see on the outside. All right, let's go into verse 9 of Exodus chapter 38. It says, He made The court on the south side, the hangings of the court, fine twined linen, 100 cubits. So it's 1,500 feet. There are 20 pillars, and their 20 bases were of bronze, but the hooks of the pillars, the fillets were silver, etc., etc. And we'll keep going down to verse 18. The screen of the gate of the court was embroidered with needlework in blue and purple scarlet yarn. It was 20 cubits long and 5 cubits high in its breadth. It's corresponding to the hangings of the court. Their pillars were 4 in number. Their bases were of bronze. Their hooks of silver. And the overlaying of their capitals and fillets were of silver. And all the pegs of the courts of the tabernacle all around were bronze. All right, so you have on the screen what is the front area there, which is what it's talking about. And so that front area is 20 cubits, so that's about 30 feet. So it's 30 feet. That's a big front door. And then we get down into verse 21. It says, "These are the records of the tabernacle of the testimony, as they were recorded at the commandment of Moses, the responsibility of the Levites, under the direction of Ithamar, the son of Aaron the priest, Bezalel, the son of Uri, son of Hur of the tribe of Judah, made all that the Lord commanded Moses. And with him was Oliab, the son of Asamach of the tribe of Dan, an engraver, designer, and embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen." All right. So now we're getting to the end of the matter. We're talking about, giving credit where credit is due. And so we see the Levites who had previously responded to Moses' call there at Mount Sinai with the golden calf, have entered into their role as caretakers and priests. And so we see specifically that Ithamar is called out and that he is a descendant of Aaron. And so within the priesthood, you had the Levites who were the priests, and then you had the sons of Aaron who were the high priest. And that lineage theoretically continued on into the temple period, or into the New Testament when we get into the story of Jesus. So then we also have reference to Bezalel and Oliab, and we see that Oliab was an engraver, designer, embroiderer. He seemed to be one more inclined to the fine detail work. And we saw before that God inspired them, gave them miraculous knowledge and understanding and ability to do these things. But if Oliab is doing the fine detail work, it maybe stands to reason that Bezalel is doing the bigger things. So, Bezalel either builds or instructs to build the frame of the altar, and then Oliab goes in afterwards and does the overlays and stuff like that. The big thing to take away from this, again, is that God specified a way to do something. God equipped them with the ability to do it, and then they didn't. Just that simple. Any questions up until this point before we start talking hard numbers?
It's just, big point is, God was so adamant about the children of Israel, a physical place. Mm-hmm. And today, he says, don't make any graven image, and our avenue to him is just prayers, our individual prayers that we worship. And that does have the church as a function to gather together, remember the Lord's Day, those type of things, but nothing like this to remember that God is with us. And so I don't know if it's easier today or easier then to know that God was with you because of the physical things, because we're physical people.
That's a good question, Tommy.
I mean,
that's a good question.
I mean, you see God's temple, you see your prayers, you see your hard-earned money, you take your bowl to the thing, you see it burn up to God, and you praise God that your gift. We write a check or whatever, we drop it in a box. Do we think much, where that would have been half a day ordeal just for worship. We write a check, that's our contribution, in a sense.
Right.
What we do for God is a contribution too, as far as physically, but it's just so different today than it is then. And I don't know if it would have been easier then to keep God in your mind and heart.
Well, let's open it up for discussion. What do you think? Was it easier to worship and focus on God back then? Or is it easier to focus and worship God today?
Back then.
You think back then? Why do you say that?
Because we have a lot of distractions today.
A lot of distractions. I think that's fair. I don't know, if you've ever lived somewhere where, driving to the store is an ordeal, right? When I was in college, if I wanted to go to Walmart, I was driving into the next county. So you better believe that when I'm going to spend a half a day driving to Walmart, I'm going to go and make sure that I get what I need from Walmart and don't go, halfway home going, oh, I forgot the eggs. So when you do have to focus your time, it does make you pay more attention. That is true. What else? Anybody else think it's easier back then or today?
Well, back then you could see God's working. Today, we believe in He's on scene. I mean, you see Him in a lot of things.
Yeah, it's definitely back then. It was very definitive. It's like, okay, Red Sea parts, got it. Pillar of cloud, got it. People just struck dead, got it. Today, it is a little harder. Like, we believe He works and we pray, but
yet them seeing the hand of God, they still slipped away.
Yeah, that's true.
The one scripture comes to mind is, blessed are those that believe but have not seen. That I think Jesus was, I don't know if it was Jesus or who wrote that. If that was a quote from Christ or if that was one of the apostles.
I feel like that's in Hebrews right off the top of my head.
Okay,
So,
blessed are those that believe but haven't seen. Us.
But it may be in both places.
Yeah. So faith is something rare or extraordinary. We believe something we have never seen by faith.
Yeah, and so, John 20. So, Jesus said, blessed are you who haven't seen. So, if we don't, it's kind of like the difference in working for something. If you see God, without shadow of a doubt, you see God, it is easier to believe. But when you haven't seen, like in the way they did in the Old Testament, right? This isn't suggesting that God isn't still active and working today. He just isn't active and working today like this, right? All right, God not recently has smited an entire group of people. You got to think, when they did it in the Old Testament, He really did it. There was no question, right? Whole holes of ground opening up and just swallowing people whole. People being struck dead and bowels falling. Like, God did it different back then. And so, miraculous, it has leprosy, skin falling off, and then next skin is brand new. It just doesn't happen like that anymore. But that's not to say God doesn't work, but we have this harder challenge because this is not how God operates, that we have to work harder for our faith. I feel. Me, Matt, you don't have to agree with that, but I feel we have to because we can't take it for granted. I think the Israelites took stuff for granted. They had God right there, and they still turned their back on Him. Right? They took it for granted. I think what you also see is that when you have tangible objects, they can become your focal point, and so that you lose sight of what's important. It became all about the ark. The ark is the power of God, right? And so David, wants to go get the ark back from the Philistines, because he thinks, oh, I need that back, and they go and get it, did end up killing an individual, but again, the focus is the ark. Various times in David's life, well, I'm just going to go parade the ark out in front like a lucky rabbit's foot. So we see repeatedly that when you have an object to focus on, it can quickly become more important than what it's meant to represent. And that's the danger. Also, concepts can do the same, right? We see the people of Israel focus so much on an earthly kingdom that they miss Jesus. A lot of them did. And I think what you see then is that God transitions away from physical representations, physical objects to put a focus on, to only the spiritual. And so then things become harder, but also things become better. Because no longer do we have to go spend a half a day here, and have to have a bull that is, specific specifications. I can just go to God in prayer. I can ask God to forgive me, and the process is expedited. But it seems, though, if you look back over the history of Christianity, we find ourselves trying to find objects to focus on because we want something tangible, okay? And, obviously we tend to think about, like, the Catholic Church comes to mind very quickly, but there are other things, right? Have you ever gone to a church that basically mandated a specific version of the Bible? That's the same concept. It is putting the focus on an object, all right? If you've ever been to a church that made the building the most important thing, is building important? Absolutely. But when it becomes more important than our worship, when it becomes more important than fulfilling the Great Commission, that's when we have a problem. I have seen churches that make instruments the focus. And I was at a wedding at a wedding for a friend of mine, and they had this huge, monstrous drum set on stage, and so they were gonna have this beautiful wedding with this monstrous, ugly drum set on stage. And so they go and they start covering it up with just a bed sheet. And I asked him, I said, well, why don't you just take that down? Oh, no, we couldn't do that. Why? It's just a drum set. No, it's got to stay. That object was more important than the marriage between a man and a woman entering into something that was biblical, ordained by God. But, choices were made. Lots of things can become our focal point. And so we as Christians have to make sure that we don't lose focus. So is it harder today than it was then? I think it is harder today because we have the distractions. It is so easy. We all have our phones that can distract us. All right, we have turn on the news, that can distract you. Work can distract us. Sports, family activities can distract us. It is when you went to worship, it is an all-day thing. It may take you a half a day to do yours, but half of that day is waiting in line, then you go, and then you offer, and then there was a meal, and for them, worship was all day. We get antsy if we're not out by 12:30, present company included, right? And so, back then, I think it was easier because it was just what you did.
And the bigger point is everybody in that community was a worshiper of God.
True.
Where in our society today, we are definitely a minority.
That is very true.
And it's difficult to continue faith when nobody around you believes, or simple things are called, evil things are called good, and good things are called bad. We flip things around in morals and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to believe what the scriptures say, regardless when everybody else isn't. Back then, you you got millions of people in that range, at least 1 million probably, worshiping. Not all of them obviously the same, but you have a community of worshipers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely within that community, there were people who were, like say, weren't necessarily faithful, but by and large, they were. And we haven't really got into it much yet, but God is very specific about them not running around and hanging out with the other nations that are in the area, and it's for that reason, because God did not want the pagan influence impacting those people. And so I've actually, for the longest time, sad to say, when you get in there and you read about the prohibition against, don't marry the Canaanites or the Hittites or what have you, people say, well, that didn't mean that, you can't have interracial marriage. And it's like, that was not what it was about. It was about not having a person of God marrying a pagan and having that person pull them away from God. It was not about interracial marriage in the way that it has been twisted in recent times. God has always called his people to be faithful. And it doesn't matter red, yellow, black, and white, it doesn't matter, right? God has always called his people to be faithful. Rich, poor, educated, non-educated, be faithful. He calls it in the book of Exodus to be faithful. He calls us today to be faithful. Other thoughts? So we got to work hard. That's what I'm gleaning from this. We got to work hard to be faithful. All right, we're going to pick up in verse 24. We're going to go a little slow on this, so just bear with me. It says, all the gold that was used for the work in all the constructions of the sanctuary, the gold was 29 talents and 730 shekels. All right? So a shekel, for those I'm sure everybody knows, is about 2/5 of an ounce. I know y'all just keep that in your head, right? So it was about 292 ounces, and then 29 talents is 75 pounds. Yes, I'm going to do the 1 talent, so that's 16 ounces, and then I'm going to do that math for us. So we had 75 pounds at a talent, 29 talents, that's 2,175 pounds of gold. But they don't measure gold in pounds, do they? They measure it in ounces, right? So that's 34,800 ounces of gold, plus a few shekels. So you round up to about 35,000 ounces of gold. Gold is currently trading at about $2,300 an ounce. Don't argue with me about troy ounces. $80,500,000 worth of gold. $80 million worth of gold, just for the tabernacle. And then the silver is 100 talents and 1,775 shekels. So it is roughly 7,500 pounds plus about that. So it's about 121,000 ounces. Now, thankfully, silver prices a little bit cheaper. Not, still, it's like $30, $40 an ounce. $27 today. So $3.2 million in silver. Okay? So 80 million in gold, $3.2 million in silver. Just in the overlay and the decorate, like, is expensive, okay, is the idea. It says here, silver for the congregation was poured 100 talents, 1,775 shekels by the shekel of the sanctuary, a becca, which is 1/5 of an ounce, a head, that is half a shekel by the shekel of the sanctuary for everyone listed in the records, 20 years old and upwards, 603,550 men. The 100 talents of silver were for casting the bases of the sanctuary and the bases of the veil. 100 bases for 100 talents, a talent a base. Okay? Each base. So, if you look, all right, you see the wooden upright there. At the bottom of each wooden upright would have been a base of silver. 75 pounds per base. They were big, they were heavy, they were costly. So, and then the shekels, we see in verse 28, 1,775 shekels. He made hooks and pillars, overlaid the capitals, and made fillets for them. The bronze that was offered was 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. So that works out to about 85,000 ounces of bronze. For those who want to know, nobody seems to care about bronze prices. Silver and gold's always the interesting thing, right? The spot price today is about $2.37 a pound. So you don't even get the benefit of ounces. So roughly $12,500. So 83 million, 3.2 million, $12,000. But it goes to show the precious versus the common, okay? And the bronze in verse 30 tells us it was made for the bases, the entrance to the tent of meeting, the altar, the bases around the court, the bases of the gate, the court, the pegs of the tabernacle, and all the pegs around it. So we get this idea just based on dollar value, and it's, you know, well over probably $100 million for the tabernacle if it were built today, right? And that's not even counting labor costs, right? If we had to actually pay labor costs, prevailing wage, you know, you're talking $300-400 million for the tabernacle, the courts, and to move to be able to move, have something that could move. All right, any questions or comments on that? All right, chapter 39, and then we'll also go through 40 real quick. From the blue, purple, scarlet yarns, they made finely woven garments for ministering the holy places. They made holy garments for Aaron, as the Lord had commanded. He made an ephod of gold and blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. They hammered out gold leaf. He cut it into threads and worked it into the blue and purple and scarlet yarn and in the fine twined linen and skilled design. They made the ephod for attaching shoulder pieces, joined at its two edges, skillfully woven band on it was one piece with it, and made like it of gold, blue, purple, scarlet yarn and fine twined linen, as the Lord commanded Moses. They made onyx stones enclosed in a setting of gold filigree and engraved like the engravings of a signet. According to the names of the sons of Israel, he set them on the shoulder pieces of the ephod to be stones. To be stones of remembrance for the sons of Israel, as the Lord had commanded Moses. He made the breastpiece and skilled work in the style of the ephod of gold, blue, purple, scarlet yarns, and fine twined linen. It was square. Felt the need to just make sure we knew the shape on that one. They made the breastpiece doubled, a span its length, a span its breadth, when doubled. And they set in it 4 rows of stone, a row of sardius, topaz, and carbuncle in the first row. Second row, an emerald, a sapphire, and a diamond. Third row, a jacinth, and a agate, and an amethyst. And the fourth row, a beryl, an onyx, and a jasper. They were enclosed in settings of gold filigree. There were 12 stones with their names, according to the names of the sons of Israel. They were like signets, each engraved with its name for the 12 tribes. And they made the breastpiece twisted chains like cords of pure gold. And when they made 2 settings of gold filigree and 2 gold rings, they put 2 gold rings on the 2 edges of the breastpiece, and they put in 2 cords of gold in the 2 rings of the 2 edges of the breastpiece, and they attached the 2 ends of the 2 cords to the settings of filigree. They also attached to it from the shoulder pieces of the ephod. Effectively, see it really well on this because you've got the chains coming down and the chains come over here. So if you ever put on football pads, effectively they latch like football pads is kind of the idea. They made 2 gold rings, put them on the 2 ends of the breast piece, made 2 rings of gold, attached them to the front lower part of the shoulders pieces, at the seam, above the skillfully woven band of the ephod, and they bound the breast piece by its ring of the ephod to lace of blue, that they should be skillfully woven band of the ephod, and that the breast piece should not come loose from the ephod as the Lord had commanded Moses. He also made the robe of the ephod woven of all blue, and the opening of the robe was like the opening in a garment, when a binding in the opening so that it may not tear. On the hem of the robe they made pomegranates of blue, purple, scarlet yarn, and fine twined linen. Again, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but one of the first things that normally goes on my pants is the leg, down by the, doesn't matter if you have good hemmed pants, they rub against your shoes and stuff, that tends to go. Ladies, if you have a dress that hits the floor, that gets all kinds of tore up, doesn't it? So it's interesting that they would make the bottom of the robe one of the nicest parts. I think that goes to show kind of how they expected this to be used. Verse 25, they also made bells of pure gold. They put the bells in the pomegranate, between pomegranates, a bell and a pomegranate, a bell and a pomegranate, around the hem of the robe for ministering to the Lord. They also made the coats of fine linen for Aaron and his sons, and the turban of fine linen, the cap of fine linen, and the linen undergarments of fine twined linen, and the sash of fine twined linen, and the blue, purple, scarlet yarns. They made the plate of the holy crown of pure gold, wrote on it an inscription like the engraving of a signet, holy to the Lord. And that was to communicate the high priest was set apart for God. All right. Then they tied it to a cord blue fashioned with turban above as the Lord had commanded. Thus all the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was finished, and the people of Israel did all the Lord had commanded. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses, the tent, the utensils, its frames, its bars, its pillars, its base stations, the coverings of the tan skin, the veil of the screen, the ark of the testimony, the mercy seat, the table with its utensils, its bread, the bread of presence, the lampstand of pure gold, the lamps, the utensils, the oil for the light, the golden altar, the offering, etc., 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 etc. Verse 42, according to all that the Lord had commanded Moses, so that the people of Israel had done all the work, and Moses saw all the work, and behold, they had done it as the Lord commanded. So they had done it. Then Moses blessed them. So they are all working on these things independent of one another in different parts of the camp. They all get everything done, and then they bring it together. And next week, we'll do chapter 40, and then we'll head into into Leviticus, because to me, 40 verses 34 and following is just one of the coolest parts of the story, with the glory of God coming. Are there any questions before we dismiss? Comments? Concerns?
One comment.
All right.
The temple was beyond majesty.
Mm-hmm.
When you went there and seen everything, it shows you how majestic God is. And I think we can get that same today by faith as we pray to Him, as we go before the throne of God. How we have the same feelings towards God today as they did back then, seeing the physical and the majesty. And when you think about how wonderful God is and how Jesus, the blessings that we have and what God has done, I think we can get the same feeling that they have by faith today.
I agree.
I just because you go before there, it's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it when you pray to God, and you know He hears your prayers. I think the same feeling you should have in your worship to God.
I agree. I agree completely. No, that's a good comment. I agree. And I think it takes work, but I don't think I ever actually had added up just how much the tabernacle costs from a dollar standpoint. But there's the cost from a dollar standpoint, but then there's also the pricelessness that is the temple of God, the tabernacle where God dwells, and you can't put a price on it. But you can put a price on some things, but you can't put a price on that. So, all right, we'll end there and we'll pick up next week with chapter 40.
See? I'm driving, so